Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show and today's weekend best of special. Another busy week in the world of politics. Oh gosh, it's never ending, right? But it's kind of cool and interesting, but cringy. There's so much. As the Democrats made their vice presidential selection and we were sold a bunch of nonsense, it was a bit of a surprise. And when the news broke that Kamala Harris had picked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, we brought on Lowry and Batya Ungar-Sargon for instant analysis about this guy's truly radical policies. Oh, he's just folksy, we're told. Cool dad. I guess with her wine mom or aunt. Sure, okay. But it was more serious than that. And this week, we also had on the veteran who replaced Tim Walz in what should have been Walz's 2005 combat deployment to Iraq, but wasn't because Walz quit on the National Guard, knowing that they were getting deployed. He was the commander. It was his unit. He sent them off with a see ya. This guy told me, his name is Tom Behrens, why Tim Walz, in his view, is a traitor and a deserter. I also talked to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch to give some behind-the-scenes details about the life and work going on at the Supreme Court and why we have too many laws in America. We got into some really interesting ones and just the way our government harasses us all. How did we let it get like this? Neil Gorsuch has answers. And I asked him about that moment that Trump was almost assassinated. Trump's the one who appointed him. It was an interesting exchange. Plus, I set the record straight about the men competing in women's boxing in the Olympics. You are all being gaslit. Yes, these are two males, and it's outrageous. Thanks for watching. See you Monday. You know, Batya, I'm thinking about the imagery, right? You've got, former Marine, and he did deploy, young guy, Semper Fi, you heard the whole thing. And on the other hand, you have Tim Walz, who did serve for 20 years as National Guardsman, but has this significant black mark at the end of it. And who's, effectively running to be stand-in for Commander-in-Chief. And as we're seeing right now in real time, being in the VP role actually can foist you into that role, whether officially or unofficially, sooner than expected. Meanwhile, and the reason I think it's interesting in addition is because I mentioned in the intro, Tim Walz changed the Minnesota flag to look almost exactly like the Somali flag. I mean, it's a dead ringer for the flag of Somalia. It's got the highest population of Somalis than any other state in America. And you look at Kamala Harris's website, we noticed this the other day. Good luck finding an American flag on there. Good luck finding one policy. One. Nothing. You know what it is? It's LGBTQ pride merch. That's what's on her website. You go to the Trump website, it's covered in American flags. His motto is Make America Great Again. It's his campaign slogan. He's got his former Marine out there. They talk about America and their love of country at every turn. And so I do see this dividing pretty quickly into the pair that loves America and what it stands for, and the pair that doesn't.
Yeah, on the policy front, it really is amazing. Of course, which policies should she put on her website? The ones that she held a year ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago or 5 minutes ago, right? She's such a flip-flopper that it would be very hard to pin her down. The split screen is very, very significant here. You have Kamala Harris reportedly choosing the less charismatic, less challenging of the potential mates, whereas Donald Trump went for a man who is clearly going to be the standard bearer for the future of the MAGA movement. You have the Harris agenda, which amounts to basically a yassification campaign, right? A yas queening, right, to the top with no actual policy. And then you have Donald Trump's record on the economic front that really made working class Americans feel like they had a shot at the American dream again. You have the Democrats caving to the elites in their party, President Obama, George Clooney, Nancy Pelosi effectively choosing the next president on their ticket as opposed to the voters. And then you have Donald Trump again and again sidelining the elites in his party, whether it's Project 2025 or whether it's the donor class who picked Nikki Haley, right? There are really two visions for the future of America at stake here. One of them says, I am going to be a perfect reflection of my voter base. I'm going to represent the multi-ethnic, multiracial social working class and their shot at the American dream. And the other side says, no, I'm going to reflect no policy. I'm simply going to be a reflection of, elite energy, right? Elite
vibes,
discourse, right? Exactly. Elite vibes, the vibes that the elites want to see out there and hope to trick the American people into going along with it.
But this election, Rich, in a way telegraphs exactly which Kamala Harris we're dealing with. Is she the 19 one who proposed getting rid of private health insurance and who wanted to ban fracking and all the things, open the border, all of it? Is that her? Or is she this new moderate, as the campaign written statements have suggested that she's reversed herself on all of that? We have yet to hear from her at all. This election tells us everything we need to know. This guy Walz, we just went through the list. Okay. First of all, Minnesota schools have dropped from 7th in the nation to 19th under his gubernatorial reign. He wants driver's licenses for all illegals. He wants free tuition for all illegals. He wants free healthcare, has provided, not just wants, has provided free healthcare for all illegals. And as I said in the intro, free is not free. He wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state. It's not yet, but he's on record saying, yes, I would like that. That makes sense to me. He has supported the Biden-Harris economic agenda. And here's the capper. He's as radical as we can get on the trans and children issue. He is Gavin Newsom with white hair. That's who Tim Walz is. He signed an executive order that says the state can take your child away from you, if you don't, quote, affirm their gender identity, meaning they say they're a girl when they're really a boy, and make sure they can get access to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, chopping off their healthy body parts. If your 13 or 14-year-old comes home and says, I want to be castrated, and you say no, Tim Walz wants the state to take your kid away from you. That's as radical as we have anywhere in the world on this issue, Rich.
Yeah, just shocking. And to the 2019 point, Tim Walz would have been totally comfortable in that primary, right? He wouldn't have had to change any of the positions he has now, right? Kamala became more left, and now she's telling she isn't anymore. Walz is still with all those 2019 positions. And ultimately, it's Kamala's positions that matter more. But the case you can make against her is that this reflects her values. This reflects where she really is. And the idea that the state is going to be weaponized against parents who want their disturbed or ill children who have gender dysphoria to be treated in a rational way where you try to wait it out and hope it's a phase that passes, rather than introducing these radical measures that, Western Europe, UK are now rejecting because there's no science behind them whatsoever. And we still have it in America and in the heartland. That's stunning. It'll be part of the case against him. And J.D. Vance was already making it this afternoon.
But look, Batya, at how the media is already rolling out the red carpet for this guy. Get used to this, because we're going to have 3 more months just like it. Take a look at SOT 9.
Walz appears to fit the all-American definition of a man from middle America. High school teacher, football coach, member of the Army National Guard before becoming a member of Congress and now governor.
Exactly. He really has that perfect backstory. He's the one, George, remember, who labeled J.D. Vance and his Republican allies as, quote, weird, which gained a lot of steam with the Harris campaign. He has this folksy, personal, informal vibe that has really appealed to a lot of Democrats, and they believe that his rural backstory, the fact that he was a former member of the NRA, as you say, he is this former high school teacher, he was a football coach, that this can help appeal to those independent swing state voters.
Independent swing state voters, Batya. They're going to love him because he's folksy and was once a member of the NRA. And then they're going to say, here, have my child start chopping.
The media thinks that because they don't care about policy, because they are rich and elites and don't have to worry about pocketbook issues or issues like, what's going on with their kids in public schools because their kids are all in private school, right? Therefore, the only thing that matters is vibes, right? Therefore, the only thing that matters is, does somebody give off a folksy vibe, right? What is their backstory? Same thing with Kamala Harris. They don't care what she represents. They only care what she looks like, right? They only care about the story. policy because they are not facing the kinds of struggles that average Americans are struggling with every single day. Now, Walz did do some things that are, pretty good for working class Americans. He established a standard for nursing homes, very important. He banned non-compete clauses, very important for working class Americans. And he also required a certain level of transparency in warehousing, which is really important for Amazon workers. This is all stuff that really matters and stuff that, Republicans really need to be paying attention to, because that is the only threat that he actually represents. And honestly, it's clear that that is not what they are putting, that is not the basket they're putting their eggs in, right? He's not being trotted out as somebody who's good for workers. He's not being trotted out as someone who can restore the American dream for the struggling working class. He's being trotted out as someone who can support, the Yas Queen-ification of Kamala Harris. And on that front, obviously that split screen we've been talking about, I mean, how could he possibly compare to someone like J.D. Vance, one of the only people in the elites who cares about the forgotten American?
So let's go back to you. It's 2005. Instead of going with the unit and being the command sergeant major in Iraq, he quits. And what happens next to you and the other guys you're serving with?
Well, in the fall of 2004, just stepping back a little bit, when the selection process was done, I was selected to a position in Vardy, which is Division Artillery, which is, he was selected into one of the 125 Field Artillery Battalion, which I was a member. We were both first sergeants together. So, I went one way. I went to Vardy to Division. He stayed in the 125. And then when the warning order came out, the 125 ended up being part of the 1st Brigade. So they were the ones that were notified that they were going to war. And I was at Division, and Division wasn't notified. So I was kind of like, well, it must not be my time. I'm in Division. I'm here. I'm just going to keep working. And, if Division gets activated, I'll go. But that's what happened with that at that point. So I wasn't in the 125 at that point, one of the 125 Field Artillery, and he was. So when 05 rolled around, he got notified. I mean, they all knew what was going to happen. I mean, it was right on the documents. It was going to be Iraq. The warning order was out there from March until May, and then May rolled around, and the rumor came out across the state that he had quit, turned his stuff in, and slithered down the steps out of the armory and had quit and retired. And everybody was in shock because senior NCOs don't do that. I mean, that you basically train for years and years. You're with your soldiers. Your soldiers are literally like your kids almost. I mean, you've watched them grow up. You've helped them shoot guns and learn how to do the radio stuff and, fix wounds if you can and different things. And then all of a sudden when it's time to go do your thing with that, you quit. I mean, that just absolutely was just disgusting. People were like, well, what is he, a coward, whatever. Nobody knew what the answer was. And I pretty much knew, well, I'll probably get the call because I'm a 13 Bravo artillery guy. And, then I got the call about not quite a month later. I mean, it was a few weeks, and then my colonel called, and it was just weird. I was out in one of my farm fields, and I was talking to him, and he's like, "Well, we're asking you to go," and then there was a horseshoe laid on the ground, and I always call it my lucky horseshoe. But other people said, "How can you say that's lucky? You went to war." And it was like, "Well, I got to serve my country in a greater capacity, and I got to help protect my soldiers and do whatever I could to make the deployment as good as it could be," because it was, like you said, it was a tough time in the country then.
So you went, and how long was the unit deployed for?
We were gone all the way until July of 2007. So when we started it was 22 months total. We had a 6-month train up at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and then we ended up, we're supposed to be a year in country. We're supposed to be an 18-month deployment, but then all the sectarian violence started in 06, late 06, and in January of 07, and we got extended to help out. We were involved in the surge basically, but we were already in country, so they just kept us in place and moved more soldiers in to try to quell the violence.
Can you just give us a feel for how rough that time was? I remember covering it as a reporter. In 2006 was when the beheadings started. It just started to get very, very dark, even darker than you'd expect for war. You were there. So were the men who had served under him. He was supposed to be there, according to these documents. What was it like for you guys?
Well, when I got home, I kind of looked at some of our ground squirrels running around, and they're always on the alert. They're looking for a hawk to fly down or a badger to dig them out of the hole. I mean, you're always think you're going to die, and about what it boils down. I mean, we didn't know really that we were going to get out of there until we got on the last Chinook to fly out, and even then there was stuff flying in the air at us, chasing us out of country almost. I mean, it was really a trying time, and they are a thinking enemy. I mean, Iran was behind all of the crap that was shot at us. I mean, it was from the explosive form projectiles to the mortars to the Katyusha rockets to the training of the people that went across the border and then came back and then used all those techniques and procedures against us. I mean, they literally were the people behind the scenes in our area. We were Shiite areas, so they were the people killing us were the proxies of Iran. And when Donald Trump got rid of Salami or whatever his name was, he was the architect of all the people in my area that died. I mean, he has 3,000 people on his head, I think. But it was a rough time. I mean, we did what we could and kept everybody safe as much as we could. We drug out some old 120 millimeter mortars and shot them back at them, and kind of got them. They didn't like getting shot at, I'll tell you that much. That kind of put them on their toes. But
I'll bet. I know that you wrote in October of 18 on Facebook, you've been trying to raise this issue. I should point out, you've been trying to raise this issue since he first ran for Congress. Once he ran for governor, you tried to tell the media in Minnesota, you need to know the truth about him, that he left us. He quit. And almost nobody picked up the story. The papers that you sent your letter to wound up endorsing him, like the Star Tribune, and ignoring you. And so this is the first time you're really getting, I think, a national audience to say what you say is the truth about Governor Walz, and Alpha News confirms. You posted something in 2018 when he ran for governor, along with two others, with another retired Army Command Sergeant Major who is named Paul Herr. And before posting the letter, you wrote a message on why you wanted to bring this story out. It reads in part as follows. On 9/11, as I lowered the flags to half-staff at the Brewster Veterans Memorial, I gazed at the bronze likeness of Sergeant Kyle Miller, who was killed in action in Iraq on June 29th, 2006, at age 19 while serving in the 125th Field Artillery Battalion. I wondered what that patriot thought that day in 2001, a teenager in school, and I wondered what all the other patriots who had joined the service after 9/11 thought on that day. When they joined, we were at war, which we still are, and getting the call to go is probably going to happen. What if everybody said, sorry, I've got better things to do? We are the land of the free because of the brave. We are not the land of the free because of those who ran. The citizens of the state of Minnesota deserve to hear this side of the story, not just a slithery politician's version of what he wants people to hear. Do you feel, Tom, that he cut and ran, that he abandoned the unit?
Absolutely. I look back on what took place then. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I just happened to get out and then a week later the paper came out and the warning order came out and I just happened to time it just right and I knew that was going to happen. I mean, the warning order was already out. Everybody knew they were going, and I don't know if he's never responded why to anybody really, except that, well, I had to quit to run for Congress, which is a lie, like a lot of the other ones. a lot of the lies he tells. I mean, but he basically said that. But, I don't know if he was a coward when he originally did it, or if he felt, well, I'm in over my head. If I go there, I'm going to get people killed, or maybe deep down he felt I'm incompetent. I mean, you can't talk your way out of somebody shooting at you in a scenario like that. And, he's very good at talking and doing that. I mean, I got to give him credit there. He loves hearing himself talk, but I don't know, and on the end of it, I think the reason he quit was political, because it was, back then, one side was it was George Bush's war, and it was an unjust war, and why were we there, and all this stuff, when it was like, I think the bottom line is maybe it's all of the above. Maybe there is some cowardice in there too, but that was the thing. It was like we were there, and I was at a huge bunker complex where there was bunkers that were blown all to pieces, but then there were some that were locked yet. And I told the EOD, explosive ordnance disposal guy, I said, well, maybe there's weapons of mass destruction in there. And he said, well, I ain't open up. He said, I got enough work to do cleaning all these rounds that are laying all over the desert out there. And it was like, well, where's the media when it comes to this? I mean, they didn't show any of that, but I mean, there was all kinds of possibilities that there was more there than anybody said, but everything got skewed then, and it was like an unjust thing, and I think that's the bottom line. But yeah, he literally, when I looked into, the Star Tribune reporter I talked to way back when, he actually said, well, isn't that treason? And I said, well, treason is probably one level over and above what he did. I said, because that's selling the country out to another nation. If you're a double agent spy or something, I mean, that's one thing. But, he is a traitor, because a traitor is basically a person who betrays a country. And that is what he did. And then I got thinking about it, about like that Bergdahl guy that just walked away from his unit in Afghanistan. And it was like, that literally is what Tim Walz did. He is a deserter too. It's a different version of it, but a soldier who leaves or runs away from service or duty with the intention of never returning. That is exactly what he did. He had no intention of ever coming back into guard or filling out one more day in combat boots. When he pulled the plug and was gone, he basically said, tough crap, United States, I'm getting the heck out of here. And yeah, that's I'm not ashamed to call him a traitor or a deserter.
We have got to get what's happening over in Paris with the Olympics and this boxer. I don't know about you, but I was flabbergasted at the amount of gaslighting going on in the media and by the IOC about the true sex of these two boxers who are competing in women's boxing. They're male. You trust me. I believe you trust me. You wouldn't be listening to this show. They're male. They have XY chromosomes. They have testes. That's male. Period. The IOC doesn't deny it, and we'll get to exactly how they're trying to thread the needle, but that's what you need to know. These are men competing as women. They're not trans, from what we understand. They suffer what's called DSDs, and that's a different thing, which we'll get into, but I'm going to walk you through it, okay? I'm going to give you the facts you need to know, but a little bit of background for you. First, the IOC has been aware of this problem in women's boxing for years. And it's done nothing because its number one goal is, quote, inclusion. And it's made that clear. It's woke. It doesn't care about women's safety or women's fairness. It just cares about making the trans or the DSDs feel welcome and safety of women be damned. But this particular case has escalated the matter because it's now in combat sports. Leah Thomas was bad enough. That was swimming, but he was in his own lane. Now we're actually endangering women. This has been banned in sports like rugby, because that's another combat sport. And the entity that controls boxing for women, the International Boxing Federation, has also said this is a no-go and disqualified these two athletes before. And they notified the IOC that these are males, and the IOC ignored it. Its only response has been to attack the Boxing Federation and to say, hands over the ears, it's not true, we're just not going to listen. They have female written on their passports. It's insane what they're doing. Let me kick it off with what we heard from Mark Adams, who's the IOC comms director, last week when this controversy first erupted with the boxer from Nigeria. There's another one from Taiwan. Take a listen to him, SOT 21.
They are women in their passports, and it's stated that is the case, that they are female. They're competing in the women's category. Again, I don't want to mention their names or whatever, but these athletes have competed many times before for many years.
Okay, so they're female, because he says they're female. By the way, Algeria, not Nigeria. And they've competed as females for many years. He skips over the part where they were disqualified from Worlds in 2023 for being men. Okay, so basically they got away with it for a number of years, therefore they are female. That doesn't hold up. It got to the point where the organization that oversees women's boxing, the International Boxing Association, felt the need to come out publicly and say the IOC is misleading you. And this just happened over the weekend. And they explained this past weekend that this thing started in Turkey in May of 2022 when they were in competition. Tests were taken and they said the results were inconsistent with femaleness. Next thing they knew, they had championships in 2023 in New Delhi, India. The World Championships come in New Delhi, India. Female World Championships. There were 324 boxers from 64 nations. It was a 10-day competition. And Taiwan's Lin Yo-ting and Algeria's Emain Khalif were two of those 324 boxers. Now, they and others, this is not that uncommon. It's not common, but it's not unheard of for people participating in this sport and others like it to be concealing that they suffer from what are called DSDs, suspected differences of sexual development. Differences of sexual development. We used to use the term hermaphrodite. Then they changed it to intersex. Now they go by DSDs. And what it means in this case is you're someone who's a male, you have XY chromosomes and testes, but you don't have descended testes, and sometimes you don't have a penis. But then when you hit puberty, something might start growing. But there's no doubt that in the vast majority of these cases, the guy knows he's a guy, at least by the time he hits puberty. And certainly these two know because they had an XY chromosome test done repeatedly, including a blood test, according to the officials in that World Championships, that told them they're men. They know. They, according to the experts, would not have any female interior, internal organs. No uterus, no ovaries, no fallopian tubes. There'd be no period, no breast would grow, and that's consistent with what our eyes show us when we see these two compete. But they do have male testes that usually are undescended, so when they are born, they may look female in the genitalia, and therefore many of them are raised as girls in the beginning by well-meaning families who don't understand what they have here. And then it becomes apparent later on as they continue to look more and more like boys, and then they hit puberty, and often the testes do descend, and something approaching a penis could start growing. And all of that deserves empathy and understanding and kindness and non-bullying. And I think we're all there. However, it gets a lot trickier when they enter female sports, especially combat sports, and then remain in them after they know. Because this is not a question of elevated testosterone. They have perfectly normal testosterone for men. For men. They haven't done anything to manipulate their testosterone. It's not a matter of doping, in a way. It's a matter of biology. And this would be the same thing as an Olympian going and competing in the Paralympics. That's not allowed. They have able bodies, and you can't compete against people who don't have those same physical advantages. It would be unfair. We would recognize it clearly in that context. We choose not to here because the IOC is woke. Let me go back to the facts. They were asked to take these further blood tests. They did. They demonstrated chromosomes. This is from the IBA, International Boxing Association presser, that we refer to as ineligible results. That was further ratified and they were removed. He said, we've got a document that was sent to both boxers, refers to the blood test. We're not able to give the actual blood test results here due to medical privacy, but both boxers signed our letter to show receipt. They had seen the XY. Both had the opportunity to appeal. The Taiwanese fighter chose not to appeal, but Emain Khalif did appeal. And he said, we had further discussions with Iman and we paid for most of that appeal, but Iman dropped it. And therefore, it was never actually adjudicated. Now I ask you, if you were an actual female, why would you drop your appeal? You were deprived of boxing in the gold medal round. You had made it through all the other rounds. You're about to fight for gold, and they DQ you for being male, and you drop the appeal. Why? Why isn't that in all the reporting? Wired. You've been absolutely disgusting. You're a tech magazine. For the love of God, stick to writing about computers because you don't know shit about fairness in sport. The IBA then sent a letter to the International Olympic Committee on June 5th, 2023, informing them of the test results. Summary: abnormal. Interpretation: chromosomal analysis reveals male karyotype, which means chromosome. Male chromosomes have been found. What happens with the IOC? They come out and double down. They don't care. They couldn't care less that the Boxing Federation is saying they're men. We tested, it's a blood test, and we told the IOC. Here is the IOC, again trying to gaslight us. Thomas Bach, the worst. He's the president of the IOC on Saturday.
Let's be very clear here. We are talking about women's boxing. And we have two boxers who are born as women, who have been raised as women, who have a passport as a woman, and who have competed for many years as women. And this is the clear definition of a woman. And there was never any doubt about them being a woman. And how can somebody being born, raised, competed, and having a passport as a woman cannot be considered a woman?
That man sitting there knows that they tested positive via blood test for XY chromosomes. He's a liar. He's got an agenda. Moreover, the IOC at that presser came out, the same guy, and said, I repeat, this is not a DSD case. It's not a DSD case. Okay, so he's trying to say, no, they're not intersex, etc. This is about a woman taking part in a women's competition, and I think I've explained this many times. Guess what happened after the presser? The IOC had to issue a paper correction. The correction reads as follows. He said, I repeat here, this is not a DSD case. What was intended was, I repeat here, this is not a transgender case. That's it right there. That's the admission. It's a DSD case, which we know because they have XY chromosomes. They are men. It's not about elevated testosterone. It's about them being actual men, XY chromosomes, which you cannot get around. The doctor for the IOC, who's on the board of it, it's not the IOC, the International Boxing Federation, Dr. Ioannis Philippatos, came out and said it explicitly. Listen to this. It's not 17.
I'm trying to say that the medical result, lab result, looks and says in the laboratories that this boxer is male.
Okay, that was incomprehensible, but I read what he said, and what he said was that we looked at the blood tests and the laboratories, these boxers are male. So he gave it up, even though the first guy who spoke for the IBF was like, oh, we can't be specific because of privacy. Then on comes the doctor, who's a board member for the Boxing Federation, and says, they're men. You've got, not for nothing, but a guy named Alan Abramson, award-winning sports writer, prior sports columnist for NBC News, saying he's seen the test himself and the letter, which the IBA concluded showed the boxers were male, and said it shows that Megyn Kelly has the DNA, which is that of a male consisting of XY chromosomes. The lab results for each athlete depict the XY chromosomes photographically, and on it goes. The proof is overwhelming, and the IOC was told. There is no way around this. I am sorry that these two got all the way to the medal rounds now. They're both guaranteed to medal because they've been beating women over and over, and they did so well that they're going to win. I'm sorry that they were allowed to do that and were falsely led to believe it would be okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. The one woman who was defeated by one of these over the weekend, you saw her hold up the XX with the fingers, XX, trying to say, I'm a woman. This is a woman's competition. And that's how it must remain if we are going to protect the safety of American women and all the other women who have to go into this already dangerous sport. This is not one of the risks they assume. Look at her, right on. But you know what really needs to be done? I'm sorry, don't box. The Italian woman who was defeated by Megyn Kelly last weekend, she wound up issuing an apology. Charlie Kirk predicted it. An apology for speaking out against him. If the IOC let him play, I guess it's fair. Well, no, it's not fair. And I'm sorry, I guess these women have to worry about blowback to themselves, but they should also be worrying about the women who come up behind them, because they too are in danger and someone's going to get killed. The Boxing Federation and the boxing officials who've been polled, one of the old female world champions, former, said Megyn Kelly's not even a very good boxer. He's winning because he's male, and female pronouns are inappropriate in this context. The co-founder of the Independent Council on Women's Sports condemned the IOC. The cover-up and championing of male athletes in women's Olympic sports is the greatest sports scandal of our lifetime. Heads must roll within the IOC to account for this unthinkable justice against women. Couldn't have said it better myself. Do you guys ever hit news of the day with each other? Is it chummy in that way?
Megyn, you're not going to be surprised that you're not going to get me to talk about politics during a presidential election year. We often eat lunch together. It's true. It's the government, so bring your own lunch. Sure, we'll talk about everything from baseball to politics to when Justice Breyer's around, some pretty bad knock-knock jokes that he gets from his grandkids.
Is it like when we all go home for Thanksgiving and we have leftists and rightists and conservatives, Republicans, everybody, liberals, debating these kinds of things over the potato salad? Or is it, I would imagine it's a little bit more elevated than that.
Well, it's certainly like a family. There are 9 people. We work together for long periods of time. We do easy things and we do hard things together. And I always think it'd be nice if the American people could take a peek at our discussions in the conference room. Now, I'm glad they don't, because it gives us an opportunity to speak candidly with one another and work through difficult problems. But I think they'd be very proud of the level of discourse and the thoughtfulness that goes around that conference table. We have a rule. We speak in seniority, and everybody goes around the table and says their piece before any further discussion. And then it's just a conversation back and forth. And it's amazing how often that conversation yields something that we can all agree on. And that becomes our starting place for our work.
Is it true that you all shake hands with all of the other justices every time you see each other?
That's a 150-year-old tradition, Megyn. And yes, we do. And I think that's a wonderful icebreaker for us. And for all people, right? No matter how difficult the matter of the day is, no matter what disagreements we might have had yesterday, we're always greeting one another with a warm welcome and a question about their family or what they've been up to over the summer. And yes, it's a great tradition.
It's really nice. I think about it sometimes in church where, it's time for to say peace and make peace with your neighbors. And I appreciate the return of the handshake, like human touch in congregation with your neighbors, even strangers to you, but with whom you have a common belief. There's something to it. And you hit on this in the book, like that tradition of going to church, some of the themes of bowling alone. That's really kind of interestingly part of the problem in the knee-jerk over-regulation of everything.
Well, now, Megyn, I'm a lawyer, so I like laws. And, I think they're very important to our freedoms, right? Without them, we can't be safe. We don't know what our responsibilities and our rights are without laws. But, James Madison a long time ago asked the question, all right, some law is essential, but is there an irony in law? And can there be too much law in ways that actually hurt our freedoms and our aspirations for equality and our rights? And I just as a judge now for about 18 years, I've just seen so many cases in which decent, hardworking Americans just trying to make their way, just getting overrun by laws that they didn't know about. And I felt it was important to take a moment to just tell their stories. I've reflected on it for a long time, and many of them were kind enough to share their stories with Janie, my co-author and former law clerk, and me. And the book really is about them, and it's dedicated to them, and it's their stories mostly.
It's incredible the way that you've chosen to approach it. And Janie obviously is brilliant, because I'm sure she did the bulk of the research, and the stories are spectacular, the ones that you've chosen. Just to put a little, header on it for the audience, you pose the central question of the book as follows. What happens, this is my phrase, to the little guy and their foundational freedoms, like the right to speak, the right to pray, the right to gather freely, when our laws increasingly restrict what we may say, they monitor what we do, and tell us how we may live? And you write in the book about how rich people with connections, or popular people, they'll do okay. If you look at history, it's when the unpopular or unconnected, unwealthy guy or gal gets dragged into the courts that all of this regulation becomes a problem. And you feature front and foremost the story of Sandra and John Yates. I told my family the story. We're still talking about it. Even my kids were completely baffled by what happened to John Yates. Can you outline it for us quickly?
Sure. So John and Sandra Yates are high school sweethearts. They moved to Florida. He pursued his life's dream of becoming a commercial fisherman, worked his way up from deckhand to captain of his own small crew. And he's out one day. Somebody comes alongside, flashes a badge, and says, "I'd like to measure your fish." John says, "Well, we've been out for some time, and I've got thousands of pounds of red grouper in the hold." He says, "Fine, I got all day." And he sits there measuring the red grouper one by one. And he determines that there are 72 fish that are less than 20 inches long, the limit at the time. Now, John's not convinced this fellow knows how to measure red grouper, because he doesn't account for their long lower jaw like he should. But put that aside, 72 it is. The agent says, "Put those in a crate, and I'll deal with you when you get back to dock in a few days." John does that. Well, when he gets back, the agent measures them again and finds 69 now, not 72, that are undersized, and he's suspicious. But John doesn't hear anything more about it for 3 years, when a group of agents surround his house, his wife's doing the laundry, and arrest him, take him 2 hours away. He has no idea what this is about. And he's charged with a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was, as you know, adopted after the Enron accounting scandal. And it's designed to prevent people from destroying documents when there's a federal investigation. But the law reads, you can't destroy things like accounting records and spreadsheets and other tangible objects. And the government's Sarbanes-Oxley theory is that John had thrown overboard 72 undersized red grouper and replaced them with 69 still undersized red grouper. And John thought that was about the silliest thing he'd ever heard. But they pursued the case even after the size limit for red grouper was dropped to 18 inches, and all of his fish, by anyone's estimation, were longer than that. They spent years pursuing him, secured a conviction. He spent 30 days in jail over Christmas when he and his wife were trying to raise 2 young grandchildren. And he was ready to give up. He was done. And Sandra said, "No, we have to fight this for the next person so it doesn't happen to someone else again." She took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court and won by a single vote. Now, that kind of spirit I admire, but look at the costs that it came to that family. John was no longer able to pursue his life's dream as a commercial fisherman, put out of work. His wife now supports the family, and they live in a trailer. So that's the human toll of too much law, right? And, you know, it's something that's happened in my lifetime, Megyn. I don't know about yours, but our laws have just simply exploded. The federal criminal code has more than doubled in my lifetime in length. There are so many federal crimes now in regulatory provisions that nobody can be sure, because it would take years just to read them. There are at least 300,000, we know. And, you know, everybody says Congress isn't busy. They write 2 to 3 million new words of statutory law every year. And the federal regulations, forget about Congress. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The Federal Register used to be 16 pages long when it started in the 1930s. Now, every year, we see 60 to 70,000 pages added annually.
This John's wife, Sandra, is really the heroine of the book.
I agree.
She brought this case, notwithstanding the enormous challenges to doing that when you don't have a lot of money. As you point out, it lasted 8 years, 3 courts, 13 different judges. And John was forced to do the time and pay the price, even though he was ultimately successful at the U.S. Supreme Court. You point out in the book, all of this is very contrary to the founders' vision of what America would be about. And you say that one of the essential purposes in our founding documents, as recognized by Justice William O. Douglas, was to take government off the backs of the people and to keep it off. And somehow that's been turned on its head with the numbers that you just espoused, that by 100 years ago, all the federal government laws fit into a single volume. This is all from the book Overruled. By 2018, U.S. Code was 54 volumes, 60,000 pages. There are 300,000 federal agency regulations, many of which have criminal penalties, and on and on. It's just spun out of control to where no one could ever understand what all the laws are out there and how many we violate in a day.
Yeah, some people say, some academics say that anyone over the age of 18 in this country could be charged with a federal felony. And that does raise a lot of questions in my mind, right? Our founders wanted for us written laws. They wrote a constitution. That was a novel idea in human history at the time. And it was designed to divide and check and balance power and make lawmaking difficult. We forget that. They saw law as restrictions on freedoms. And so they wanted lawmaking to be especially difficult task. And that's why we have 2 houses of Congress, why you have to then get the president to sign it or override his veto. And we've kind of taken that process where we're supposed to have the wisdom of the masses, all the people involved, their representatives coming together, compromising, working through problems, and passing laws that we can all maybe understand and agree on. We've outsourced a lot of that work to federal agencies where there are experts and they have very important contributions to make, but there aren't the kinds of checks and balances that Madison had in mind for us.
Yeah, they're not elected. And as you point out in the book Overruled, they often not only will be the promulgators of these basically criminal statutes that we're going to have to abide by, but then they're the judge and jury too. They will create the regulation, they'll charge us with violating it, and then they'll try the case, and surprise, surprise, they're not the most objective judge.
Well, when Janie and I sat down to work on the book, we wondered how many federal agencies there are, Megyn. And it turns out federal agencies can't agree on how many federal agencies exist. There are at least 3 different published numbers of how many of them there are. And you're right, they write rules, very important work. They prosecute people for violations of those rules. And then in many cases, they serve as the judge for the case too. Jonathan Turley, professor at George Washington, says that the average American is 10 times more likely to be brought before one of these administrative judges. They used to be called hearing officers, but now they call themselves administrative judges. Great. Than an American is likely to ever face a judge and a jury. And what's at stake there? Why do we care about this? Why do we write about this in the book? Well, when you're before a judge, you're before somebody who is pretty independent, who's been appointed and confirmed and been through that process, but after that doesn't owe anything to anybody, right? His only job or her job is to apply the law as faithfully and fairly as they can. And you have a jury of your peers to decide your case. Before an agency, your administrative judge or administrative law judge is likely to be somebody who works for the very same agency that's bringing the charges against you. You're not going to have a jury. And many of the procedures that you'd get in court, including basic rights like cross-examination, are not always given to you the way they would be in court. It's a very, very different system. And it's unsurprising as a result that agencies almost always win before their own judges in ways that they wouldn't win in court.
That fierce independence of the judiciary is going to come back into this discussion as we get into some of the criticisms of the courts these days and the push to make them more accountable, and whether that's also inconsistent with the founders' vision. You do an excellent job of outlining the problem in terms of the volume of law, the impossibility of understanding the laws, real man and women stories of how it's impossible to navigate the system and how people have gotten caught in this web. But I do want to tick through a couple of the passing references because they bring it home. Justice Gorsuch goes through the 6-year-old you may have heard of who landed in court for picking a tulip by the bus stop, 10-year-old whose lemonade stand was shuttered for lack of a business license. We talked about those kids all the time when I was on Fox. It's a federal crime to enter a post office while intoxicated. There goes my Saturday night. To sell a mattress without a warning label. I never knew that was real. We all rip those off of our mattresses thinking that's a joke. To injure a government-owned lamp in D.C. and, absurdly, to consult with a known pirate, which is right on point. Who spends their time coming up with this stuff, never mind enforcing it?
Well, that's the thing. I used to think those were like stray anecdotes. And then I started seeing them in my courtroom. When I was a 10th Circuit judge, I had a case, I think it was a 7th grader, certainly a middle schooler, who was trading burps for laughs in his classroom. And I might have been guilty of that in the day. And instead of being just taken to the principal's office, or maybe his parents called, or maybe detention, he was arrested and handcuffed. And it went to court. Now, I don't know what's happening in our society that leads to things like that. Another one, a small healthcare company in Kansas was accused of Medicare fraud. Big, big deal. That's the kind of thing that can put your company out of business. And it went through 6 years of those kinds of administrative law proceedings we talked about a moment ago, got to my court. And the three of us, we sit in panels of 3 on the courts of appeals usually. We looked at each other and said, I think they comply with all the rules that were in existence at the time they provided their services. And the government's accusing them of violating rules that it didn't even promulgate until years after they provided the services. Are we missing something? And we got the government lawyer in front of us and heard argument. And it turned out the government had just become confused. It was producing so many rules so fast. It had no idea that it was accusing somebody for violating rules that didn't even exist at the time.
The theme I see out of the book, again, Overruled, is these government entities overreact to problematic behavior, minor problematic behavior, and they punish good or neutral behavior over and over and over. There's so many examples in the book, but one of them that our audience may be familiar with is Hemingway's cats down at his estate, which some regulator deemed a problem. Everyone was perfectly happy. No one was suffering, but then they were once the regulators stepped in.
Yeah, so there was this law that said that if you're an animal exhibitor, like a zoo or a circus, you have to have a federal license for your animals. Fine. Then the agency took that and kind of ran with it and said, basically, animal exhibitors include everybody from children's magician, Marty Hahn. I talk about him in the book too.
That's a crazy story. Poor guy.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. But the Hemingway Museum, turns out they needed a federal license. And somebody from the U.S. Department of Agriculture went down there and said, okay, you have these cats. They're all descendants of Ernest Hemingway's original 6-toed cat that he got from a ship captain as good luck. And they've been taking care of them for years down there. They even stay during hurricanes to make sure the cats are okay. And they have a little cat cemetery with tombstones. I mean, these cats are loved. And they're all named like Marilyn Monroe and Cary Grant. And at any rate, this person from the Department of Agriculture says, you got a problem taking care of these cats because the wall isn't tall enough, so the cats kind of wander into town. People love them, but you got to keep them in, and so you got to put the wall higher. And the museum said, well, we'd love to, but there's another federal agency that says we're a historical site and we can't change the wall. So, all right. Then the agent said, well, maybe you need to put a hot wire on top of that wall. So they put the hot wire in, and of course that fried the cats.
Oh my
God. And the agency got very angry about that. And the museum said, well, hold on, you guys are the experts. We're just trying to do. Anyway, they went through 3 rounds of applying for permits. The American government spent hundreds of thousands of dollars sending agents to Key West. They rented an apartment across from the museum, took surreptitious photos. They're labeled like "could be a cat from Hemingway Museum" on them. And PETA did a study. They brought in PETA, and PETA said they saw a bunch of fat and happy cats down there. It took years, and ultimately, of course, it got resolved. But the museum tried to fight it and said this regulation is too broad an interpretation of the statute. They fought it all the way to the 11th Circuit and lost. The 11th Circuit said, you got a pretty good reading of the statute there, but there's something called Chevron deference, which requires us to favor the agency when there's any question about how best to read the statute. So you lose.
Mm-hmm. And you point out too, I want to get to Chevron, but in New York City, for an example, opening a restaurant in New York, citing a New York Times article, you'd have to go through 11 city agencies, often with conflicting regulations, get up to 30 permits, registrations, licenses, and certificates, and pass 23 different inspections. That's exactly the kind of bureaucracy that they were running into down at the Hemingway Museum, where they just wanted to love these cats and not electrify them or electrocute them. Same thing as the poor magician who had similar problems. You got to read the book to find out his story, Marty Hain, where he's just trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And if he wanted to pull an iguana out of the hat, he could have done whatever he wanted to it. But ultimately, they were actually getting down to the nitty gritty of, well, if a tornado comes, the cat needs to go into the holding shelter first before the dogs and cats. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah. Megyn, when he had he got whacked just like the people at the Hemingway Museum. An agent came up when he was doing a show, children's show, and pulled the rabbit out of the hat and said, do you have a license for that? And he said, no. Do I need a license? I mean, he's a law-abiding guy. He wants to do it right. And they told him if it's an iguana, you don't need one. And if it were rabbit meant for stew, that's okay. You don't need one. But for the children's show, you need a federal license. And he got one, of course. And then, later after Hurricane Katrina, they said, well, now you need to have an emergency preparedness plan. And, for chemical spills and hurricanes and all manner of disasters. And he had to hire a disaster management expert to help him write a 28-page disaster management. He lives in Missouri. Oh my. He says, we do have one thing I'm worried about, and that's tornadoes. And my plan is to get the family in the basement, then the dog and the cat. And if there's time, I'll get the rabbit. And of course, the agent, no, I don't care about the dog or the family or the rabbit's got to go first. He even had a home visit. He had a home visit when they wanted to see, how he carries the rabbit to the shows, and he showed him the cage. And the agent said, well, now how do you know which way is up when you carry the rabbit? And Marty says, well, I've got a handle. I carry it from the handle. And they said, no, you have to have one of those stickers that says this way up on it. And he said, well, where do I get some? And the agent said, well, I'll send you some. And 2 weeks later, he got 200 stickers in the mail, thanks to your tax dollars.
It's so, we have to laugh because it's truly just absurd, but it's one of those laugh or cry situations. You know of all these cases because they wound their way through the judicial system. These people were forced to defend themselves against an overreaching federal government that does not understand those founding principles of how limited it was supposed to be and how we formed the whole country because we didn't want that boot on our neck inside of our homes. And when we do a magic show, not everything has to be overregulated. And one of the examples that's the most heartbreaking in the book, not the least of which, because we actually went there for a short time during the COVID lockdown, was what happened in Butte, Montana. It's where you may not know this, Justice. Rob O'Neill, the guy who shot bin Laden, is from Butte, Montana. And boy, I've talked to him many times, but I've never talked to him about the history of his hometown and how this government overregulation stopped people from helping themselves.
Yeah. So Butte, Montana, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, was one of the richest places on the planet. They discovered copper there. And the wires for our telegraphs, our telephones, bullets for World War I, they came from Butte, Montana. It was so important in World War I that Omar Bradley was sent there to guard it. And of course, over time, the plant closes, the smelters close, and it becomes it's a tough place to grow up these days, economically. And they also discovered that that smelter had poured a lot of arsenic into the air that had settled on the land. 300 square miles around Butte became a Superfund site. And EPA did a good job with industry trying to clean it up. But they set the acceptable arsenic ranges to be left in the soil at 250 parts per million in residential yards. And in many municipalities today, you cannot put anything in a landfill that's greater than 100 parts per million. And about 100 people in Butte said, wow, I don't feel comfortable with 250 parts per million. Where did this come from, and can we do better than that? And EPA said, well, we think that's an acceptable cancer range, that 250. And the people of Butte said, well, we'd like to clean up our own land or get this company to help us do better. I mean, we're talking about daycares and kids' backyards. And of course, the industry fought it, fair enough. But EPA came in on the side of industry, and they said that federal law preempted any efforts by the states to clean up the land, or even by the people themselves in Butte, Montana, without EPA's permission. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we held that the law was exactly as EPA and the industry read it. I dissented, but I admit my colleagues had a pretty strong reading of the law. I guess my question just is, suppose that is what the law is. Is that how it should be? What do we think? Of course, environmental regulation is very important. And maybe if there had been some earlier, we wouldn't have had the problem that we had in Butte. But at the same time, while expertise is important and Washington regulation is important, isn't the local knowledge of Butte also important? Aren't those people entitled to think about cleaning up their own land without asking people 3,000 miles away in Washington for permission?